offense, folks, but you know, it's up to you.
We've heard.
Your choice. We're gonna be talking about Hinduism if you're interested in that. If you're not,
Okay, you can be in the.
Sherry, can you go hit the
Sophie,
button? Got it?
Well,
You got it?
Sophie
Yeah,
will do
so-
art in the back.
I can do it. I got it.
You sure?
I got it. Yeah.
She's in charge.
I
Don't
am
mess with her.
capable.
All right, all right.
Sort of.
Right. One side or a leg off.
Yes, right.
There we go.
Perfect. Yeah.
Hi, Sue.
Well, here we are.
And here you are.
There you
Here
are.
we all are.
Yeah.
Let's open with a word of prayer. See, it seems like it'd be that kind of thing to do. We're all kind of quiet. Heavenly Father, we give you thanks for this morning and for your many blessings in our lives. We pray your blessing upon our discussions today and on the services. May it all work to your glory. In Christ's name, amen.
Amen.
We
So
want to go around and introduce
we're
ourselves.
gonna go around it. Well, I'll tell you what.
Sorry, I just, you know.
I
Yeah.
knew they was just gonna say that.
Yeah, of course.
I'm David Fletcher. And who are you, lady?
I'm his boss, as you can tell. I'm Joyce.
I'm Lindsay Lopez and I'm Sophie.
Sophie.
She likes to be anonymous.
Yeah, that's right.
And Tanya Carey. Diane Dins.
Hi, and Jerry, Carrie.
Lois Sheridan.
Todd Leahy. And then we have some people online as well, if they want to introduce themselves, say hi. You can.
Okay, we've got Sue Mylander. Let me highlight you. I'm sorry, I'm replaced by, so, well, there we go. Say hi, Sue.
Hi, Sue.
Hi, Sue.
She's muted.
She always is.
She's overcoming.
And we've got Edna Hetherington. Say hi, Edna.
Hi, Edna.
Hi,
Hi,
Edna.
Hi, Edna.
And
Now I'm here. Hello.
we've got this handsome gentleman who,
He's ours.
Yeah.
I want to be muted on this, right?
Yeah.
It just said unmute yourself, but I don't think I'm supposed to do that. Well, let's talk about, last week we started, it was a very exciting day. We had free hot dogs that week. And we asked the question, what are some of the big questions people have? And do you recall what any of them were? Anybody want to venture any?
Does everyone believe in God? Hindus and Buddhists and all, it is,
Yeah.
everyone
Yeah.
believe in God.
Yeah, sort of.
Yeah.
A lot of them do.
What happens after death?
What happens
Oh,
after
that's a
that?
good one.
Anything else we can recall from last week?
Why are we here? What's the meaning of all this?
What's the meaning of all this?
How do we find peace and what do we do about or with suffering?
Yeah, questions of suffering, questions of how do we find peace. Those are all things we talked about. And it seems that one answer has to, goes back to ancient India. And we talked about that. So let me get a little bit into the that story. Oops.
No, you just need to share
I
screen.
know.
Okay, sorry.
I think I've never done this before.
Well, you kind of seem like it.
I did it for years.
I know, but.
And yet, I think it was better then, but I don't know, maybe not. Let's see, it's the slideshow.
Did she admit that person?
Yes. Oh, my goodness.
Yeah.
We mentioned last week that this great civilization, the Indus Valley or Harappan civilization, was augmented or overtaken, or however you want to look at it, by Europeans.
Mhm.
And that's actually why many people in India are very, very light skinned, because they derive largely from those Europeans. And the people who are more dark skinned have more of the influence of the what were called the Dravidian people who live there. And there still are Dravidian people today, but most people in India are a mixture of those two. So that gives you a little bit of a picture. So you can see how widely that group dispersed around the world. And that's now today there are Hindus among us. And if you look over there on the right, maybe I can minimize this. Affect what you see. No, it doesn't. Okay. There's Trump at a Diwali celebration and Biden at a Diwali celebration. Hindus are getting more recognition. There are about 2.5 million Hindus in the US, which is about the number of Episcopalians, I think. They are the 4th largest religion in the US, even though they're only 1% of the population. Christianity, of course, being first. And I believe Judaism and Islam. In Illinois, there are 128,100 Hindu people, and by comparison, our diocese of Chicago is just under 31,000. So there are a lot more Hindus in this area than there are Episcopalians. Oh, I was also going to mention that in Illinois, there are 18 temples or mandirs. This is the Sri Venkateshwara Temple in North Aurora. It's quite spectacular.
Oh, wow.
I've taken many field trips there, and they're always very nice to us. It's got many deities throughout the building, but the primary deity is, let's see, how do they put it? Well, it's a form of Vishnu.
And if you drive on 88 out toward
Yeah,
DeKalb,
you
you'll
can
see
see
this
Yeah.
from the road on the left, on the south side of the road.
Do they have tours or do you have to make an
You
arrangement?
just call and they'll let you come in. They don't have official.
And one of the
tours.
things we talked about is if there were a group of people from here that are interested, David could arrange a tour. Because he's taken his classes. I went with one of his classes. It was really interesting.
And it seems to me, I went to on a Muslim one, and they're so kind and welcoming.
Everybody,
Would that be true this too?
Oh, very
Yeah,
much so. Yeah,
absolutely.
very happy to see you. And you might see, well, you usually will see priests going around doing various things at the different shrines. And sometimes there'll be a family having a private service called a puja. And they'll all be sitting around on the floor and the priest will be doing incantations and making offerings. So it's very
Yeah, they
interesting.
have food. It's
Yeah.
like-
A lot of fruit.
Mhm.
This is the one in Bartlett that some of you have seen up off of 59. It's actually more spectacular in terms of its architecture. I mean, it's really, it must have cost many millions of dollars to build this thing. And
That's two in this area.
oh, there's more. We
There's
just saw
more.
one.
We just saw one that looked like it was a Protestant church that became a temple because it had the little, what do you call those things? Like the little domey things
Yeah.
on it. And we were just driving up Bloomingdale Road. It's right there.
And don't we have
Oh,
one on 53, just right
Right.
by us? They took
Look.
over
Yeah.
a Presbyterian church or something like that
Oh, is that,
Now it's
is that
Hindu.
Hindu? Okay.
Yeah.
on it,
there's a Muslim one too, though.
And they're, yeah,
Uh,
I think they're
across the
across the
street.
street from each other.
Right.
across the
Good
street.
for them.
And
Okay.
then there's also isn't there a big one in Lamont that you used to take
Yes, yeah.
students to?
So is that saying that of these 2.5 million, there's quite a concentration in the Chicago area?
They're
Yeah.
largely concentrated in, well, they're in cities. There are very few of them in rural areas. They typically are in cities. Chicago has a lot.
Okay.
The New York area has a lot. California, Southern California has a lot.
Okay.
So yeah, but you won't see a lot of them in Oklahoma. or places.
Remember when we drive up from San Diego?
Yeah,
there's
right.
a big-
So just another word about the Vedic religion, because it's so important. The religion of the first Hindus, you might say, they had a ceremony, and because these were nomadic people, it was a ceremony that didn't involve any sort of like stream or river or anything. It was a fire that they could make wherever they were. It was basically a fire service. There's a little bit of, I don't know if you can see the illustration very well. But they could take it with them. It was very portable. It was a simple way to connect them to the gods in the sky. And so they would have offerings and they would put various grains and butter and so on into the fire. And then the smoke would go up. Now, before the service, the priests who were going to conduct it would drink something called soma. We don't know what was in soma, but they saw a lot of things. And they could see the gods like circling around the smoke in the sky. So it must have been,
Can you
Pretty
X that so that it's not on the screen?
yeah.
Thank you. Oh, this is still on, it's, maybe I have to do it on that one too.
What happened here? Okay, so the priests would chant prayers and then adding the offerings and the smoke would ascend. And they still do that in India. I don't think temples here do it, as far as I can tell.
Are they dominant in India?
Yes,
Mhm.
yeah, over 80%. So here are a couple pictures of the fire ceremony. Well, actually, one on the fire ceremony on the left, and the one on the right is, you might say, this is sort of surprising, but it's a Eucharist among the first Christians. And what's interesting to me about both of these religions is that they had this ceremony that was very, very important to them. And then over the centuries, they reflected upon it and tried to figure out what it actually meant. And in the Vedic religion, that's done in what we call the Upanishads. But so like early Christians, they had this ceremony, and it was clearly important to them, but they didn't fully understand what it was. And then they would speculate about it, and how all that could work.
Oh.
And so I think there's a kind of parallel to what you see with the Eucharist. I mean, the Eucharist goes back to the very early Christians. And then over the years, philosophers and theologians would come up with theories to account for what was going on there. Here's the fire sacrifice being practiced today. So those services are quite long, and a lot of chanting and music, and
What
and
is long?
it's well, a couple hours.
It says sacrifice. What does that mean?
It means that they're offering things to the gods.
Okay.
Like what kinds of things? Like if Diane showed up, would she get in that? Would they
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 throw
would put
her
you-
in the
they would
fire.
put-
Sacrifice me?
they would put you in the fire. No animal sacrifice
No, okay.
here. It's all grains and things like that.
With the idea that the smoke ascends and then,
Right, and then the
Yeah.
gods
Oh,
will
whoa.
we'll get the messages from up there. The oldest texts are called the Vedas. And an important thing, and to be very important for next week, is that for any school of Hinduism to be considered orthodox, and they're pretty widespread, they believe lots of different things, but you have to agree that the Vedas are the authoritative scriptures. And one of the things that Buddha does is he says, I don't buy it, I'm out. And that makes, I mean, he could have stayed a Hindu if he'd still said he liked the Vedas, but
Mhm.
once you break from the Vedas, you don't. They were written about 1500 BC, and the most important of these is the Verses of Wisdom, or the Rig Veda, which is a compilation of hymns, a lot of stuff about the battles that they fought and everything.
So the Vedas are kind of their scripture?
Yeah, they're the most important scripture. And then attached to that are the Upanishads.
The what?
Upanishads, UPAN, Upanishads. The Upanishads further develop the themes from the Rig Veda. Now, there are many deities that the Aryans worshipped, and
So can I just ask
Yeah.
you a question? So like, if you're not a Hindu, if you don't accept the Vedas.
Right.
When it says the authority of the Vedas, like in Christianity, there are all different views of scripture in terms of,
But it's always.
what it says, yeah.
yeah, is it like literal word for word?
Right.
Is it authoritative? You know, I mean, there's
Yeah.
different.
But it's still Jesus.
Right, but different groups of Christianity will say others must not really be in because they don't accept our interpretation, you know, so I'm just wondering how that,
I think it's like that. I think, from what I've read, you can have a variety of views about the Vedas. There's actually one school of Hinduism that believes that every word of the Vedas is so true, it's not even, doesn't have to be inspired by God to get authority. The words are just true. And they're eternal truth that existed before anybody wrote them down. Every word is literally true.
Sound familiar?
Yeah.
Yes.
And what
Um,
language would these be?
Sanskrit,
Sanskrit.
which I don't read, by the way. I don't know if you do. There's some of it up there if you want to, somebody can interpret that for us. I can't quite make it out. Now, there are many deities, and I don't want to go into detail about all the various deities that are in the Vedas. But one of the most interesting one to me is Deus Pitar. And just what's interesting is that he's Zeus.
Mhm.
His father Zeus is what that means. So there's Zeus as he appears in Greek mythology,
Mhm.
and there's Deus Pitar on a chariot being carried by horses.
Is just the pronouncing of the word have anything to do with Deus? with
I don't
God?
think,
Dios.
well,
Yeah. Mhm.
yeah, I'm not sure Zeus.
that's interesting.
Yeah.
Zeus and,
Mhm.
yeah.
Zeus is a pretty high up deity in Greek, I know.
But-
Now, most Hindus don't know anything about Deus Pitar. There aren't temples to him or anything, but he is listed as a deity in the scripture.
So is that because of some of that migration
Yes.
that they heard about Zeus?
Yeah, they carried it with them from Europe. And it gets to Greece, and there's another version of that in Roman
That's
mythology.
Jupiter in Rome.
Yeah, Jupiter.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Who got named for a planet?
Right,
No.
hey.
A little bit about the Upanishads. One of the things that's important is that they contain the Dharma Shastras. And these are law books, and they have a detailed application of what Hindu life is supposed to be like. And there are also epic stories, the Mahabharata. When we were in England, there's a TV show that serialized the Mahabharata.
Oh, my.
There's so many Indian people there, and they all like to watch the Mahabharata on TV. Maybe it's here somewhere too.
Mhm.
And
100,000 verses?
pretty long.
Oh,
Mhm.
Yeah, so
Oh,
So
like as a book, how big are these?
it's pretty big. Yeah, but about as big as-
So I'm thinking that each religion seems to have a section that's devoted to law,
yeah.
Jewish and this, and I know Islam.
Yeah, oh, Islam is very strong on it.
Mhm.
Well, I think, we talked before about the big questions, and then the other question that comes up is how do we organize around our answers? And generally what we find is we want to organize in such a way that people have some parameters as to what's considered acceptable behavior.
Mhm.
It can be very strict or it can be more loose, but there have to be some ideas, and Hinduism does have that. One of the questions that is sometimes raised is how many gods do they have? Do they have one god? Do they have 350 million gods? Here's some of the deities here.
Is there something in between that?
Yeah,
is there a guy higher than that?
350 million.
and those are sort of both true.
Mhm.
There are all those deities, but they all are reflections of one god. That's Brahman. So Hindus usually will just talk about God. And they mean Brahman. And it doesn't seem to bother them that there are all these other deities. I've heard them compared to Catholic saints in a way.
Mhm.
They are beings that sort of stand between us and God and reflect God's glory to us.
Mhm.
And they'll intercede for us. So it may be something like, that's probably a close analogy.
That helps, helps me understand it
Yeah.
a little bit.
Mhm.
I don't know if that's accurate. but
I think it's accurate.
Yeah, okay.
You English-speaking Hindus in the West say,
Mhm.
refer to Brahman as God.
Yeah.
Or they use the word God.
No, they're
not
just talking about
Brahman.
God and they mean that, yeah.
So the language.
You see,
that sort of
Brahman,
fizzled out, Brahman language and.
Brahman
the
is
other-
interesting though, because Brahman is not a personal deity at all. And Brahman is, it wouldn't even be proper to say Brahman is holy. Like, he's way beyond all concepts of language. Nothing we say about Brahman can be literally true about Brahman. He's far beyond what we would call predication. Which makes it kind of hard to really, relate to. And that's why these other guys.
So if they talk about God, is the word God then synonymous with Brahma in their thinking?
I think that's, yeah, they're using God to refer to Brahman or something. Something high up in the system.
Something greater than which cannot be conceived.
Yes, yeah, the being greater than which nothing can be conceived. That's a little philosophy for you. So Brahman is not Brahma, the god, and it's not the Brahmin caste, which is different spelling. Brahman is the ultimate god. He is seldom worshipped directly. I think there's maybe 1 or 2 temples in India dedicated to Brahman in North India.
Now, when you mentioned Brahman, you've used male pronoun.
Right.
Would Hindus use a male
They
pronoun?
typically would, yeah. But actually that's misleading because Brahman is beyond gender, of course, and he's beyond, or it's beyond personality, doesn't have a will.
You gotta pronounce it quite carefully though. 'Cause
Yeah.
they're so, I mean, they're the
Brahman.
same, Brahma and Brahman.
Yeah, you
No.
to spell it out. The ultimate principle of the universe is how Brahman is described. The ultimate cause of everything that exists and all the changes that happen in the world. So in some ways, similar to the Christian notion of God, except for that it's not personal. So unlike the gods of Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, or that God, I should say, the same God. Some of you know what I'm talking about. Unlike the God of Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, it's not a God that cares. It's more of a metaphysical entity than it is a personal entity.
So doesn't have a character like
No
benevolent
character.
or
No character.
all.
Not a jealous
Knowing.
God, not an angry God, not a loving God. It's just,
That's a hard concept. to
it is.
grasp.
That's why we have these other deities. So,
They kind of lead you to the,
yeah, the other deities you can wrap your head around. So the supreme deities of Hinduism, and what's really interesting is that every one of these is a couple, a male and female couple. So first I'll tell you who the males are because, men go first.
We know.
And this is sometimes called the Hindu Trinity, but that's misleading because the doctrine of the Trinity is a very specific Christian doctrine, but these are 3 gods that are very close together. There's Brahma, the creator. That's not Brahman, that's Brahma. Brahma also is not worshipped directly very often. But Vishnu, people love Vishnu. Vishnu is the sustainer, the being that keeps all things in existence. So the image here is, imagine the universe is just a giant lump of clay. It has no beginning, no end. It's just this giant lump of clay. And Brahma makes it into a pot. And then Vishnu keeps it going. And then when it's time to remake the universe over eons of time, the universe has to be rebuilt. Shiva busts it down. Shiva is the destroyer. So Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva. There's a lot of biblical language about God as the destroyer. Didn't like that too much, but it's there. So each of these male deities has a consort or wife. So they're called the Tridevi, the triple goddesses. And here they are, all three of them there. So the one on the left peeking out is Lakshmi. That's Vishnu's wife, and she's the goddess of wealth and fertility. So you might pray to Lakshmi about your business. If you're thinking of opening a business, you have to pray to Lakshmi.
Or if you want children.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Now, now when I say pray to Lakshmi, what I mean is you've got to get a puja set. So get some cash together, go over, tell the priest you need a puja to pray to Lakshmi for your business or for fertility, and that's typically how it's done.
So you don't just do it in
You need
in your
help.
home.
Yeah, I mean, people have shrines in their home too, but it's considered more effective if you have a priest do it.
For which you have to pay the priest, or
Yeah.
the priest
Oh.
is paying some.
You pay the
Else.
priest, and that goes to the temple maintenance. Parvati is the goddess of power and might, and she's the wife of Shiva. And then over on the right is Saraswati, the goddess of knowledge and wisdom, the wife of Brahma. And every school in India, every Hindu school in India, which is pretty much all the schools, will have a festival to Lakshmi every year. And they have a statue of Lakshmi, they buy a statue of Lakshmi, which is just, people produce.
Why
those.
don't they have Saraswati if it's knowledge and wisdom, if it's a school?
That's what I meant to say,
Oh.
Saraswati. Did I
Oh,
say
you said
Lakshmi?
Lakshmi.
I just like saying Lakshmi so much that I couldn't stop. No, Saraswati, they pray to Saraswati, they get her statue, they adorn it with flowers and paint and everything. They have, I think, a week of services. When they're done, they take it to the local river and throw it in. Doesn't it? What's interesting about these statues, as they're used in India, is that they're replaceable. You don't just keep the statue, you just dump it in the river.
Is the river full of statues?
Well, that is all. Because they're no clay, so they, yeah,
Oh,
I was going to say, well, are they made of wood or
they're clay.
clay? So ashes to
Sooner or
ashes.
later.
Yes.
Put it in
Still gotta
recycle.
be-
Now,
I'm just thinking of like going down to the river to wash your clothes and you have to move these
Move these
statues. out of the way.
they're taking the kids to the beach, Mom, too many statues today. Krishna and his wife Radha. Krishna is a big, big deal. Now, Vishnu goes through several incarnations over different aeons, and everybody's favorite one is Krishna.
So Krishna is Vishnu,
Yeah,
but a reincarnation of
and
Vishnu?
what's called an avatar,
Mhm.
the term that we've picked up
Ah,
in
You're
Western
not gonna
thought.
give us a test, are you? This is
No.
just.
Oh,
Whoa.
Krishna is one of the manifestations of Vishnu and his wife Radha, and they are an ideal couple. They're extremely in love and everything, but Krishna likes to play around. So there's a story where these milkmaids are standing by the bank of the river bathing, and he shows up. And every one of them has the experience of being alone with Krishna
Mhm.
and having sex with him. And then they talk about it later, and it turns out they all had the same experience, which is, that's cool.
And that's okay.
Yeah, that's
You're not
fine.
arrested or anything.
That's all good.
Yep.
Good grief.
Yeah.
He's also a hero in the great book, the Bhagavad Gita. He
Oh,
is a
yeah.
chariot driver for a warrior in battle, who then shows himself to be God.
Mhm.
There are a lot of stories about him as a baby, adorable. There are a lot of pictures of him as a baby and how pretty he was. He's blue, but once you get past the blue, he was a cute baby.
And are these stories from that ancient text or have they been added to?
Yeah, they've been added to, yeah.
Mhm.
But they'll have roots in the ancient texts.
So Krishna is So George Harrison was the Beatle was
Yeah.
into
Mhm.
Krishna, right?
Right.
Mhm.
And he sings the song My Sweet Lord, which was really interesting, if you recall that song,
Uh-huh.
because he's praising Jesus, then he's praising Krishna,
Mhm.
Oh,
because he
Mhm.
was messed up. No, that's just how-
On
He looked at-
acid or something.
Well, I think he was trying to say it's all the same,
Mhm.
but it really isn't, but he thought it was.
One of my sons had a friend, who's young, named Lakshmi.
Mhm.
So that name is apparently used.
Yeah, oh, yeah.
Are all these other names,
Yeah,
Used
there are
by-
Krishnas running around,
okay,
Mhm.
Krishna Jones.
Lakshmi is the only one of the
Yeah.
names I've seen up here
Yeah,
today that I actually know
Yeah.
someone who
Right.
has that name.
Yeah, yeah, it is, like there are a lot of, culturally for Anglos, we wouldn't call a kid Jesus. But to Hispanics, that's fine.
Jesus,
Yeah.
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 So,
I have
Jewish.
Jesus in my class.
so,
Yeah.
I don't know, this doesn't sound like a big question for church, but did Radha fool around like her husband?
No, she's stuck with Krishna.
So, yeah, okay,
Yeah.
just
Yeah, there aren't
wondering
any
if
stories
it
of her
was like
doing
a-
that.
So is this a model for life, these two?
Yes, once you get the milkmaids thing out of the way, I mean, that they're considered an ideal married couple.
So,
Hmm.
All right.
And they're very, very devoted to one another and
there you
Except
go.
when when there are
There
milkmaids
you go.
around.
Well, so the thing is, that Krishna is in many, many texts. He's depicted as a warrior, and sometimes often he's typically pictured as a deity. And then these other interesting stories come up. But
But you pray for each of these as your need means,
Yeah.
whatever your need is.
right,
Mhm.
Well, you better have a list so you know what.
yeah, you do. You need
Oh,
a
sure.
chart.
Well, their altars are huge in their homes. They're
Yeah,
huge and they have
very.
gods everywhere. And
And if you
later-
go to
Yeah,
that
I
temple in
just
North
know.
Aurora, for
Yeah.
example, many of the deities are there.
Oh, okay.
And so, now, go back to the Upanishads. The central finding, as they reflected on that fire sacrifice and thought about the universe, is thou art that.
Hmm.
What does that mean?
I
That
am what I am.
the Atman, that's the word, Atman's an important word here. Atman is basically your soul, your inner spirit, is Brahman, the supreme God.
Mhm.
So at the core of your being, who you really are, is a part of Brahman.
That's a
Mhm.
beautiful concept.
And that is,
Yeah.
I like
it's
that.
quite
It's
lovely.
in
I
the
think.
DNA.
So Atman and Brahman are one and the same.
Mhm.
Now, we don't realize that because we also are wrapped up in the world of matter. And so our Atman is kind of buried inside of us, and so it's gonna take some effort to dig down and find that Atman.
Mhm.
It takes so much effort, it's probably gonna take more than one lifetime to do it.
Mhm.
But once you can recognize that that's your true self, you don't need to be reborn anymore.
And then what happens if you're not reborn?
Well, if you are reborn, you'll come back, of course, as some other being. If you're not reborn, then you hit the jackpot.
Oh.
Oh,
You go up in smoke?
Well, the goal is to reunite with Brahma,
Right.
which is
Mhm.
like a dreamless sleep or death or a return to the womb. It's like a drop going back to the ocean.
Mhm.
That's a good concept.
Yeah.
So that's interesting, right?
Is that
That you
their
be-
concept,
Yes.
like a drop going
Yeah.
in the ocean?
So essentially you
Wonderful.
become part of the cosmos.
Mhm.
oh.
Now, reflecting on this just for a minute. So the highest state of enlightenment is to lose your personal identity, everything that makes you, your personality, and to resolve back into this Brahman. And that's the picture of liberation for Hinduism.
Mhm.
And this, of course, will take many incarnations. You'll be very fortunate if it happens after this lifetime. reincarnation is not something that Hindus find charming. Reincarnation is tedious and oppressive. You don't want to be reincarnated over and over again, to learn all the same lessons again and suffer everything. And so at this point, there's a sense in which Hinduism has a kind of negative look on life. And reincarnation, it just exacerbates that. So it's really great if you could, you know, in this lifetime, if you could achieve enlightenment.
Now,
And you
excuse
can
me,
be excuse me.
well, one of the things you said last week is, in comparing Hinduism to Buddhism, that Hinduism is what, much more okay with life and the
Right.
pleasures of this world and
Yeah.
so on. But
This doesn't sound like
this doesn't sound like that. This sounds like, you know, maybe
Yeah.
one
It sounds
time
hard.
through this
Yeah.
ordeal is enough.
it's bait and
But if
switch,
you have to
man.
do it,
Right.
10,000 times or
Yeah.
30 million
Yeah.
times, then it gets to be kind of dull.
Well, I think both things are true
Distressing.
of Hinduism. I think it's life affirming. It's, you know, very comfortable with the idea of sexuality and, you know, comfort and luxury. And it's also world renouncing at the same time. And I'll show you in a minute how they do that.
It's interesting that reincarnation doesn't seem like it's a positive, because I
Right.
always feel like when people talk about reincarnation, it's
Yeah.
like,
Sounds like a-
well, you'll just, you know, you
Yeah, right.
can
Do
get
it
it right
okay
the
now.
next time around, yeah.
Yeah.
Am I right that you can be reincarnated in animals as
Yes.
well as
Yeah.
in
Oh.
living
Yeah,
things?
right.
Mhm.
Come back
Now,
as a
if you
cockroach.
become an animal in your next life, that's because you were really a bum in this life. If you're
Right.
really a jerk, you might come back as something, an animal.
So like if you come back as a cockroach, that's not a good thing.
That's not great.
Not great.
It means you kind of screwed up this life.
But on the positive side, you'll be thinking like a cockroach. You won't have any memories of anything.
Mhm.
So really, in that case, the purpose of this existence is to suffer degradation and work off some of your bad karma, which I want to talk about.
That's going to be a termination of your chance of ultimate liberation, though, isn't it? If you come back as a lower animal.
No,
form,
because you can work
Yeah.
off your bad karma and then get a better birth.
Even if you're a
You can-
cockroach.
Oh,
So if you're a
Like
good
you can
cockroach,
become, yeah.
Well,
But how do you become a good cockroach?
Well, I mean, obviously, there's no chance for any kind of moral growth in the cockroach realm, right? You're
Right.
just a dirty, stinking cockroach.
Yeah.
But in this incarnation, you have worked off bad karma. Now let's talk about karma. Karma is a universal principle of existence, and it is not being run by anybody. It's not like God is keeping track. It's just the universe is keeping track, you might say, of every good and bad deed and thought. And so this is how morality gets enforced in one level, right? There's this notion of karma. You don't want to accumulate bad karma, you want to accumulate good karma. And then your next birth will be based upon your karmic balance at the end of your life.
Mhm.
So if you've got good karma, bad karma. Now, let's say, here's a problem for all religions. What happens when a baby is born with birth defects?
Mhm.
For Christianity, we asked, how could a good God allow this? And it's a problem for Christian theology. Hinduism doesn't really have a problem with it because that individual is being paid back for bad karma in a previous existence, which I think is pretty horrific, but that's what they say it is. Everybody, anybody who's got a problem or suffering is always the cause of previous sin, you might say.
But what do they do then? If there's a child that is,
Well, they take care of it and
Yeah.
do the,
I mean,
because it's good karma for you to relieve suffering.
but they still take care of it?
Yeah.
I mean, okay, I don't want them to say, okay, let's throw it out.
No, they don't do
like they
that.
do women in China or something.
No,
and that child's responsibility is to do the best they can with what they have,
Right.
and that's good karma.
and then they'll have a better life in the next existence.
Okay.
Yeah, so. Now, the thing we were talking about, and Tad was kind of bringing up, is how do we balance the search for salvation and living the earthly life? And I think Hinduism is a really interesting answer to this. So the ultimate goal is to be liberated from your earthly body and to be one with Brahman, right? We know that.
Mhm.
And Hinduism also values ordinary life on earth. Getting an education, getting married, having a family, your business, your profession, just living together in society. Those are all good things. How do you reconcile that? Am I supposed to be pursuing earthly goods, or am I supposed to be working on my soul as soon as I become smart enough to realize that I've got a soul that needs working on? Well, in the Upanishads, there are these things called the Purusharthas, the four ends of man. And I think you could say the four ends of humanity here. This is found in the book called the Code of Manu, or the Manusmriti. So they're Dharma, Artha, and Kama, and Moksha. So Dharma is to do what's right. And what's right depends on your social position. So the Dharma of a wife is to be a good wife. Dharma of a mother is to be a good mother. Dharma of a leader is to be a good leader, among other things. So Dharma has to do with figuring out what the duties of your station are and then fulfilling them.
Mhm.
So it's what you might call the ethical part of it.
So you know your station.
Yeah, you know who you are.
Mhm.
Artha is the pursuit of wealth. And not everybody can have a lot of wealth, but if you get lots of wealth, that's great.
Mhm.
You live in a palace, that's great. Now, we talked about this before. Christianity has always wrestled with Artha,
Mhm.
because it turns out that a lot of Christians end up making quite a bit of money, but Christianity is all that positive towards money. Woe to you, rich!
That's right. yeah.
Pretty.
It's an interesting difference, right?
My mother always said, oh, God must really just love poor people because he made so many of
That's right.
them.
Yeah.
That's right. He sure did.
It doesn't love the rich.
I
Well,
know.
it's interesting, like, when I was working at College of DuPage and I was doing career counseling, the Indian parents would come in and they'd want their child,
Oh,
or
yeah,
a
sure.
husband would want his wife to pursue something where they would make lots of money.
Yes.
Oh, yeah. Sure.
That was pretty much the goal. It didn't matter if they had the interests or the abilities, this is what they're gonna do.
So you see, in this country, you see a lot of Hindu physicians,
Mhm.
right? A lot of Hindu executives.
Mhm.
I think if you're, a good Hindu boy, let's say you grow up and you want to be an English teacher or something, it's like, wow, really?
A flute player.
Flute player. Of course, Krishna was a flute player,
That's right.
So-
That's right.
so I guess that's okay.
That is okay. That's okay.
You're okay, Jerry.
Only if I were a Hindu.
Right.
Tell us too. Tell us.
Now, Kama is pleasure. And have you ever heard of there's a book called the Kama Sutra?
Yes.
It's a sutra is basically a scripture, and this one has to do with sexual pleasure, which is a positive thing. When the British first came to India, and they would go out to some village somewhere, and there'd be these temples. There are sculptures of couples having sex all over the outside of the temple, and the British were very shocked. They blushed a little bit, and,
A little bit.
yeah, they couldn't. They had trouble reconciling to that. But Kama, that's okay, dining, enjoying life, sexuality, those are all positive things.
So then you determine who you're gonna be when you're born. You say, okay, then I'm gonna work toward this, or I'm already this person.
Well, you will generally do what your parents tell you to do,
Mhm.
which is very often what they
We all
do.
hope that.
Yeah,
Well, and you're born, you know, the caste system, you're born into a station in life in
yeah,
India
Yeah,
too.
we'll talk a little bit about
Where,
that.
where-
which is kind of different than
Which
how,
limits what you can do.
You're preordained. or
Yeah.
something, yeah.
And India has been wrestling with the caste system and because it's so hideously unequal and unjust, and they're not thrilled with it either, so.
unlike our system, which is so.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Enlightenment.
So then moksha is liberation or salvation. It's to break free from this life and to, you know, achieve union with Brahman. So those are all legitimate goals. So the task is to get them kind of organized. And so they're,
Balance.
well, sequenced.
Mhm.
So in the Manusmriti, there's a thing called the 4 stages of life, or the ashramas. And this is only for the top 2 castes. I'm not sure what the lower castes are supposed to do. But if you're in the higher castes, here's how you sequence your life. You start with is what's called the student phase. So here, your job is not salvation. It's not pleasure. Your job is study and obedience. And so you just be a good student. And then that stage ends and you get married and you become a householder. And this will be the majority of your adult life. So this is when you're raising your kids, you know, you're paying taxes, you're tending to the farm or whatever you do, doing all these things. And just, you know, you're enjoying life. You know, you got kama, you got artha, you know, everything you need. And you're not really thinking a lot about the hereafter. That's not for this phase of life. And then you might, after you retire, go to what's called the hermit phase. And now this would typically be, you would live in the family compound or home, but kind of in your own room and stay to yourself and do a lot of time, spend a lot of time praying, things like that, to reading the scriptures. So you're not really trying to think more about your salvation. You don't need to worry about that in the householder phase. But in this phase now, you're not really in, you know, there's not karma and artha now. There's shifting over to think about, you know, your final destiny.
At what point do you decide that you're no longer a householder?
Well,
You're too
it's
old to
typically-
enjoy karma.
Yeah,
Yeah, right.
Yeah, why not? Let's stay here. This is fine.
which apparently is pretty old.
Mhm.
Yeah, but anyway, no, it's when, it's basically when you are, your kids grow up and they have kids and you retire, stuff like
What, you're still having karma.
Yeah.
I don't know that.
that.
Too much information.
You're not following the script.
Yeah, right. Wait a minute. Back to this guy.
The wanderer phase, this would not be something everybody does, but you might actually just leave your home altogether and become like these men, just kind of travel about, renounce your former identity.
So it's the Alzheimer's stage.
Yeah, yeah, a little bit. Yeah, you wouldn't know, right? You wouldn't know something.
David, you're losing control.
Senility.
I can't go- well,
Could have to expel a couple of people.
I have no control when this one starts. So my point here is I think that what's interesting about this, that life is sequenced in phases and different ends of life are predominant at different stages, right? So in the householder stage, you have kama and artha being important. And after that, it's moksha. So it's kind of interesting, I think. This is a quick thing about Upanayana. This is the born again ceremony for Hindu boys from the upper 2 castes. And it happens, it's kind of their confirmation.
Or bar mitzvah.
Bar mitzvah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So they,
Interesting.
traditionally they would go off with a guru into the woods and be instructed. And then they would come back and their head is shaved and they're dressed in finery and so on. And the most important thing is this braided cord is put over their shoulders, representing these various goddesses and so on, to suggest you need to be pure in thought, word, and deed. So it's a very similar ceremony to bar mitzvah, or bat mitzvah, or confirmation. It's, you are no longer a child, you're now entering adulthood. So that's kind of interesting. I want to say something about the caste system, the 4 varnas. And these are often compared to parts of a body, where society is a body. So what body part are you? Paul talks about this.
I
right?
know that is so
Yeah.
interesting.
Members one of another. So the head varna is the Brahmins, the priests. Not everybody who's a Brahmin will be a priest, but that's the priestly caste. It's like in the Old Testament, it was the Levites, who were the priests, right? And that represents the head. That's the noblest, best part of the body. And then you have the arms, and they represent the Kshatriya caste. These are, actually kings would be Kshatriya, they wouldn't be Brahmins. Buddha, by the way, was a Kshatriya. So these are the warriors and noblemen. So they're obviously also quite high. And so both of those castes, the boy will go through that Upanayana ceremony we talked about. They'll be born again Hindus. They refer to it as being born again. And then the legs are also important. It gets you around. And that's the commoner caste, the Vaishya. They're still respectable, but they're not, elevated. And the feet are the lowest. These are the workers. And there's no way anybody in that caste can hope for salvation in this lifetime.
Oh,
And the lowest of these groups are the Dalit caste. And they have the worst jobs in society.
What would be the worst jobs?
Managing latrines,
Yeah, right.
burying the dead. Well, you don't bury the dead, you burn the dead. Dealing with corpses. I don't know. Grading intro to philosophy.
I was gonna say
papers.
philosophy professor.
who
Grading papers.
determined your caste?
Attending committee meetings.
What was that?
Who determines your caste?
Your parents.
Birth.
Well,
Yeah.
I mean, so it's out of your hands.
Totally out of your hands.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Your social, it's a hereditary social caste system. And this is, in the Upanishad, this is an important part of how we live as Hindus. It's pretty much universally recognized in India now that this is normal, but it's still deeply ingrained.
Can you aspire to be reborn again?
Oh,
in a
yeah,
higher
you
class?
can do that, but you can't aspire to change classes in this life. You can't, let's say you're a commoner who develops an app for the iPhone and you become a multimillionaire, you're still a commoner.
You can't lift yourself up by
No.
the
And you
bootstraps.
can't have your son marry a Brahmin girl.
Who gets to have a thing on their forehead?
Girls, ladies. I took my class,
Oh.
I took my class in the Hindu temple one year, this is several years ago, and we all got back to the van. And that'll be interesting. See what happens. You walk around, we can count it down. I don't know what did happen to it. But this may be the last field trip.
How did they get there?
Apparently, a priest was putting dots on there for it.
Yeah.
I didn't see it happen, but anyway. So the caste system is troublesome. Actually, now there are affirmative action programs in India, particularly for government jobs, so that Brahmins don't get to gobble up all the good jobs. Affirmative action programs that give special consideration for lower castes.
Well, our society isn't particularly fair either.
Oh, yeah.
Noticed.
I mean, if you went to Harvard, your child is gonna have a much better chance getting into Harvard than,
Well, they're pretty much, Harvard graduates in particular seem to run the country.
right.
I mean, business, education all over the place. Law. So I think they're gonna.
Laura, do we need to say goodbye to you?
I think she's already said goodbye to us.
No, I have 4 more minutes. This is really interesting.
I'm gonna say a quick word about sectarian Hinduism. These are based on a variety of texts. So people will find certain texts and they'll build a particular way of thinking about religion based upon those texts, including things like the Bhagavad Gita and so on. And this is the kind of religious Hinduism that the ordinary, unphilosophical person just trying to practice the religion is what they would do. And they all are focused on a personal God. The way Hinduism works is that people get attached to personal God. They don't think about Brahman. There may be some philosophers doing that, but that's not your job. And it's based upon the idea that there are different paths to salvation, different margas. There's not just one way to achieve moksha. So there's a karma marga. These are the people who work on salvation primarily by their deeds. These are altar guild kind of people, right? Then prana marga is salvation through knowledge. This is the path of the intellectual. That's a perfectly valid way as well. And then there's bhakti marga, which is salvation of devotion, which is a lot of Krishna talk is in here because Krishna's a lover, so a lot of lovey talk here. But there's a lot of this in Christianity where you're trying to have an intense emotional connection to God. There's some of that at the consecration. Yesterday we went to the consecration of the bishop, and it was a lot of there were certainly emotive parts of it, and that's bhakti marga. You might think of a revival meeting as being bhakti marga. So anyway, those are the margas, and so
There's a lot of concepts in Hinduism, aren't there?
I know. Well, here's a song to Krishna you might like. All my inhibition left me in a flash when he robbed me of my clothes, but his body became my new dress. Like a bee hovering over a lotus leaf, there he was in my night on me. True, the God of love never hesitates. He is free and determined like a bird, winging toward the clouds it loves. Yet I remember the mad tricks he played, my heart restlessly burning with desire, was yet filled with fear. That's
Really scary.
Wow.
That's not what we think of as religious.
Not
you know.
So there are overtones about equality of men and women.
Oh, yeah. Krishna and Radha are equal. All the deity, consort deity pairs of, the Trideity and so on, they're all equal.
So in Judaism, you can be identified with the Jewish culture, but not be a practicing Jew.
Right.
Is the same thing true in Hindu?
It's true for many people.
That's because.
Many people are Indian, and it's not like you have to go to church every Sunday. You show up every once in a while for.
So they have this background and then they kind of create their own version.
Particularly, that's how everybody practices religion in America, right?
Anyhow.
Your own thing.
It's interesting, because a large percentage of Americans believe in reincarnation. And that comes right out of Hinduism. It's not taught anywhere in Christianity or Judaism.
Oh. So going to heaven and being with God is kind of the ultimate reincarnation. That's real.
No, I mean, reincarnation would be the idea that you would have maybe more lives along the way, then you would ultimately, it's the ultimate moksha, right? To be with God, to be free from all the troubles of this life. That's typically what religions want. And Hinduism has its version of it, and Christianity has its version of it.
There was a nun at the Tao Center in the Wheaton Franciscans. And she was the mentor of someone I went to for spiritual direction. And she gave off an aura that you could feel before she came in the room. It was just unbelievable. I mean, you could actually physically feel it, like here comes Sister Virginia. Well, she told people she was on her last reincarnation of thousands, and she knew it. And she was going to go with God when she died. And that, I mean, they believe it over there.
That's not in any way Christianity.
No, no,
But-
Well,
but-
the
but-
Wheaton
but there-
Franciscans are
But
out
there
there.
are Christians who believe it, right?
yeah, sure.
And,
Oh, they
uh,
absolutely
yeah.
do.
But I mean, it's not what you would call Christian doctrine by any
Right.
stretch of the imagination.
No, long stretch.
So how is the passing when death, the moment of death comes? Is it individual to each person, or does the faith allow you to move into the next
Well,
phase easily?
essentially,
or-
based upon your karma, you will have a better incarnation, a worse incarnation, and that happens immediately. At which point, by the way, all of your memory is erased. So when you are reborn, you're not gonna think, wasn't I a prince back in the days of? No,
You don't
no,
think
no,
about
that's-
that?
That's not Hinduism. That's not Hinduism. It's considered a great benefit, a great blessing of God that he wipes all that clean.
It seems like you're.
But a lot of people who
That's your
talk
brain
about
doing it.
Yeah,
reincarnation
Shirley
say,
MacLaine or somebody.
say,
yeah.
well, I was this or I was that.
Yeah,
That's a
more-
romanticized
yeah,
version
exactly.
of Hinduism.
I have some Indian families that I'm working with, actually for the first time in my life. And it's different, their attitudes, their approach. I don't know whether they're practicing Hindu or not, but they're certainly not Christian, and I know that for sure. And they're wonderful families, and you have given me insight into possible,
Yeah, it should help. I think.
and I'm very grateful.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that.
Yeah.
Now, let me just say one thing. So Hinduism, is a way of life. It's been practiced by many millions of people over a long period of time. But at some point, some people raised in Hinduism start to find it doesn't meet their needs. And one of those will be Gautama, who was a very well-positioned person. He was a prince, he had a wife and child, he lived in luxury. But he started to think, isn't life kind of futile? What's it all about? And so we'll see how he retains a lot of Hindu concepts, that karma, reincarnation is all there. But he rejects important Hindu concepts, including the Vedas. And he also rejects the idea that we even have an Atman. So he's gonna be an interesting, well, not knowing Hinduism makes Buddhism seem more interesting in a way, to see what he retains and what he leaves. That's it. That's all I got, my friends.
So we're.
And on that note, I'm gonna go ahead and go. Thank you, everyone,